Okay, why don't we get started? I realize that we're de facto operating on Berkeley time, which is 10 minutes after the time we're scheduled to operate on. And we do have a couple of people who had Berkeley connections who can at least claim at least claim that that was their thinking when they began organizing the march down here. I want to thank particularly the participants, but particularly those people who are coming here voluntarily on a Saturday morning. I hope that we have something interesting to contribute to your morning. This morning, what we're doing is essentially picking up some of the themes that were in yesterday's discussion, but two elements that I think are quite particular to the changing character of some of the issues we're dealing with. The first of these is essentially the extent to which national governments or states or national bureaucracies do or do not have a similar set of relations to what was the case 20 years ago. How, to what extent have relations between the government and individual corporations changed or stayed the same in these three places? And then the second question, which we'll pick up after the latter part of the morning, is the question of how much the rise of China economically, politically, militarily makes a difference in what's going on in these three places. So what I've done is I've asked a couple of people to get us started with questions or comments or observations on the topics that I've raised. And to get started on this question of contemporary state and corporate relations, basically I'm just asking Motoshi Suzuki, Yunhan Chu, and Jongrin Mo to get us started. So, Suzuki-san, are you ready to raise any points or questions or comments?
Just arrived.
Just arrived. Yunhan's always ready. I'll turn to Yunhan. He's.
Okay.
Do you want to get us started with any comments or observations that you may have?
I'm the dumb bird, that fly first, right? Well.
The thing about that flying geese model that's important to remember is the lead goose is theoretically supposed to go to the back after he gets tired, but
okay.
You're going to stay out there in front. So,
I will start my remark with anecdote, but I think it's a very revealing anecdote. Just a few days ago, the chairman of our National Federation of Industry, which is the peak association representing the entire manufacturing sector. Xu Senfa, his first name is Xu. At a press conference, he issued a very disparaging or very critical statement describing, the difficulty or the dilemma that Taiwan's economy is facing today. He summarized the remark with 6 shortages. He said we suffer, our economy suffer from 6 shortages. The number one is we suffer the shortage of labor. The next one is shortage of land. Next one is shortage of power, which means electricity. The fourth one is shortage of water. The fifth one is shortage of talents. Okay, and his federation have issued quite a few open remarks like that over the last several months. It's like begging the government or begging society, you have to help us to resolve those problems. Otherwise, we cannot simply, keep operating the way we used to. And then this time, I think he's also very cynical. He said, we have the 6th shortage of morality. I don't know what he specifically what his remark referred to, but I do know why he complained about shortage of labor. I think yesterday in my remark I mentioned that we have a big, very serious mismatch in our labor market. Okay, we produce too many college graduates without marketable skill. But at the same time, the manufacturing sector, the service sector, they couldn't recruit enough people, to be, the clerk, the skilled labor, the technician, people like that. And then he mentioned about the shortage of power. But it has something to do with over the last few years. There was a big fight over whether Taiwan should activate the fourth nuclear power plant, which was almost completed, just ready to go. Okay, but the recent nuclear accident in Japan reopened the debate. So there's a strong voice coming from many different corners, pressuring the government simply to terminate. Well, in the end, the government mothballed the entire plant, which cost $13 billion to build. Okay, so if it's mothballed, which it might, if not, reactivated soon, it will become the most expensive white elephant on our island. And then, but the nuclear power account for 70% of our power supply, and that plant alone will fill up, about 8 to 9% of our total consumption. And since our first nuclear power plant is phased, it will be phased out. It's already obsolete. So indeed, Taiwan is heading toward, a prospective shortage of power, within the next few years. Water, because nowadays, due to climate change, sometimes we will have much longer dry season. So sometimes it creates drought, okay? And a lot of our dams, they are not well maintained, so the mud keep, rising, in those dams because the local government cannot enforce the strict, preservation regulation in the mountain area of the upstream. So a lot of them can function only at 50% of its design capacity. So that cut down our capacity to deal with the drought. At the same time, all the plan for building new dam were vigorously opposed by all kind of social movement, community. The not in my backyard, things like that. So no, we haven't built any new dam over the last 10 years. I built, that's just. And then talent, I think, because nowadays the salary, the prevailing wage in Taiwan is pretty low, depressingly low. So a lot of talents, they actually, try to find a better paid job elsewhere, in Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai, Beijing, or Australia. Okay, so that. And sometimes the startup company in mainland China, they can offer such a lucrative package, to raid, our talent pool. And that happens more frequently over time. For instance, the semiconductor. Now, China is going to launch their ambitious project to develop the indigenous capacity, manufacturing semiconductor, and they throw billions of dollars. So over time, our research team at ITRI, the entire team, left, packing, and leave. Because, the other side offer, their not just double, but usually triple or quadruple their compensation package. Okay. But then, 2 days later, when Chairman Xu issued this, very stern-worded, remark, it's a sign of, deep frustration. They don't have anyone to turn to. Say, help us, and I don't know, and some company like Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, SMC, okay, but it's very resourceful, it's very profitable. So now they have a plan. They have planned to build their own power plant. They have planned to, to recycle every drop of water, coming out of the plant. Because they anticipate, this this shortage problem. But not every company, like, TSMC, have that kind of deep pocket. They can absorb, internalize, okay, those important elements, supply of those important elements themselves. But 2 days later, we immediately heard a rebuttal from an activist, social activist, someone I also claim, being my former student. I don't want to name her name, but nevertheless, her attack is also very dramatic. He said, okay, there's another shortage, the seventh shortage, the shortage of shame. So implying that, Chairman Xu is shameless, issued a statement, and her comment that, you guys, the big business, you enjoy all the benefit, tax benefit, subsidy, including subsidy of electricity, and then you oppose, the raise of minimum wage, so vigorously, okay. You simply want to push for more tax, benefit, even furthermore. Although at this time, our corporate income tax is the lowest in the world, 17%. No other country in East Asia, collect that few, that little tax from the corporate world, and the de facto rate is only like 11 to 12%. Okay, the nominal, the ceiling is 17. But it's very sad to observe this episode. This just means that there's total breakdown of social trust among all the major stakeholders. Okay, and another sad thing to observe is that the absence of the state. Where's the state? It disappeared, right? And the president, where's the president? But I know why, but in Asian society, a chairman of a peak association, okay, issues such kind of very critical and at the same time very depressing statement. You make everyone lose faith, Apparently, he tried to raise those issues to Minister of Economic Affairs, to the Premier, to the President. And to be honest, I think all those high-ranking officials, they listen. They are very responsive, but they couldn't deliver. They couldn't deliver. There's no way they can overcome, so many obstacles, so many veto players, along the way. On one hand, anti-nuke group insists that you should mothball the fourth nuclear power plant. At the same time, there's no place you can find, enough space to set up the wind power or the gas burning power plant because it's not in my backyard, okay, scenario. So that's where we found ourselves. So I would say, on the one hand, it's very difficult nowadays in Taiwan, regardless who's in power, really to reconcile those conflicting interests, and try to model through kind of a middle road, and try to broker any kind of bargain, okay, among contending social forces. And every group, every single issue group simply take things into their own hand, okay, and always take a over my dead body attitude. So this is what I call the challenge of governability. So regardless the fact that, yes, the business community, they can always have the ear of the government official, even up to the president. But even that doesn't really matter. because helpless, the government become really helpless, dealing with those issues. They cannot simply, remember we're talking about developmental state model. It's very sophisticated, right? You are dealing with, how to address the deficiency in terms of R&D, in terms of, financing, in terms of risk absorbing. But nowadays, even the basic infrastructure, the basic demand, might not be met in the near future. I'm sorry. This is. I hope that didn't.
That's a nice depressing mood to get started on a Saturday morning. People can have a little bit more caffeine to get going.
Yeah. Okay.
Shulman, do you want to
Sure.
add any observations or comments on this, either from the Korean perspective or the more general perspective?
Yeah, I guess everyone will. Taiwan probably is not an exception. That everywhere, everywhere in the world. Yes, I feel bad about about describing Korea's situation in a negative way. But I will I will do my best not to be so. I will try to give an alternative. But I think I always consider myself a minority, and my perspective is probably does not represent. Unlike Yunhan, I think you are also minority. Okay, I'm also minority, and I'll also tell you about it. I don't know, it's a story, but I wrote a book actually that I don't do serious research. I don't have time, so I decided to write a popular book last year. It's called Small Towns and Big Companies. The title is okay, I guess, in English, Small Towns and Big Companies. The reason why I wrote this book is because so much economic power is concentrated in the main city. So, and the rest of the country it basically has given up producing new companies or new industries. So, if I talk about Korea, then no one will read the book. So I pick 4 cities in the United States, 4 cities in Europe, and 2 cities in Japan. That produce global brands, and just talk about the history of those companies in those cities, how a city and then the company kind of grew together, and why they don't, leave their hometowns even after becoming the globally dominant company. And so, but I guess in the United States, I pick. Of course, not, by American standards, they are not very small, like Seattle or Portland, Austin, towns like that. Europe, I did a little bit better, like, the Vevey is home to Nestle, and there's Alamhult is a Swedish town that's home to IKEA, and there in Europe has so many examples like that. But in Korea, Busan is the second largest city, Busan, with a population of 3 million people. Then the whole southeastern region has a population of 13 million. That means it's as big as, a bit smaller than Netherlands, and much bigger than Sweden. But that southeastern region, which is the main industrial heartland, and really haven't produced any new industries. And okay, the reason why I say that is that, of course, it's about time that I feel that we discard old way of thinking, the old the developmentalism. That means, what I mean by that, as I explained yesterday, like small group of people, like planners and managers, and they can identify and develop, new industries. I think that's so elitist and, in many ways very authoritarian. So I'm trying to find a way to diversify our economic capability, and one way is, of course, aligning with local governments to support local industry. That's my agenda. So I wrote that book, and I'm writing a book on the Korean small towns, industrial cities, how they should compete and support new industries. So my idea of developmentalism is that a small group of elites deciding everything. And instead, I think we should focus more on creating basically a local ecosystem or local regional economies. And some of those can be what we call Silicon Valley types, like R&D-based innovation or entrepreneurship ecosystems. But even there, like I differ from my friends here that those really don't represent anything new. You're right. I mean, it's just a new way of old developmentalism. They still like to work with the elite, scientists and universities and concentrate them in research parks and trying to, the same. Just the style is different, but basic elitism hasn't changed. So we have to do that too. But I think we have to look at other possibilities like just traditional industry clusters. Like it doesn't have to be high tech, but we do have them in the United States, of furniture clusters or toy clusters. I mean, but we haven't thought about how to like upgrade them or make them more competitive, or what I call demand clusters, like lifestyle industries. That's actually Jeju Island in Korea is emerging as a new lifestyle, industry city and region, and Korea has other cities like that now are building their local lifestyle industries. And so I think our task is to, what I call here is that to build more local industries, not national industries. I think just trying to, promote national industries. I mean, it's we of course we have to do that somewhat, but we have to spend more time on local industries and local economies, and because we rely too much on extremely narrow set of educated elites. So we must democratize, this is my keyword here, we have to democratize our systems of innovation and entrepreneurship. I think that's our fundamental challenge, because there are deep-seated biases in Asia, in all three countries, in favor of an elitism that is not really appropriate for an economy that must nowadays mobilize much larger group of talents, or much different kinds of talent and individual initiative, not just Seoul National University graduates or National Taiwan University graduates. So in Korea, we are a 3% society, 2% society, because only 2% of people are supposed to contribute ideas and creativity. Those like the top universities. 3% of high school graduates go to top university. That represents 3%. But I don't have any scientific base, but I say that 30% is the right number nowadays. 30%. So we have to at least tap into the talent of 30% of the population, but we are now satisfied with 3%. Japan, I think, does a little bit better than what we do, but not much better. I think Taiwan probably the same situation. So this is my idea. So widening the talent base, I think, local economies and local industries, I think, to me, politically, the fast way to broaden our economic base. And but whether people listen to me in Korea, no, I doubt that. And why? Because this elite-based developmentalism has not really entirely failed yet. And no one thinks that we in Korea. Not many people think that we need an alternative. So these Korean elites, the Taiwanese elites, they are still, they think they have a chance. And second, this is, I think, fundamental limitation of Asian society, that this academic or intellectual elitism is so important to our identity that that they fail to recognize the very limitation of this elitism now. is that they really, it would be very hard to persuade them that we have to work with 30% of other people. They are so elitist in their attitude toward ability, and actually that actually 30% of population are actually capable of innovation. It's a shocking to Asian elites. They wouldn't say that to you, but they don't believe that. No. Yeah, that's my comment. Yeah.
Just a very interesting way to conceive of that, which is a movement from the developmental state to the developmental city, or the developmental prefecture. So in some respects, the same model with a cooperation between business and government, but moving down the level of government and right. Making something much more embryonic, but good. Suk-san, anything you want to enlighten us about on the case of Japan and the corporate-state relations?
Okay. Thank you, John Green and Johan, for taking first shot and second shot for me. I had a little time to think over what I'm going to say. I'll concentrate on the main bank system and the manager-centric corporate governance. Those are two important properties of Japanese developmental state or a coordinated market economy. Those two properties have changed great deal for last 15 years, which is very indicative of the dismantling of Japanese developmental state or coordinated market economy. Let me start with the main bank system, how it worked and how it helped for the long-term thinking and the expansion of market shares, finally the profitability and innovation of Japanese corporate world. Under the main bank system, almost any company, small, medium, large, designated the main bank. So they turn to main bank for borrowing money and business advice and issuing corporate bonds. And sometimes when the companies get into financial trouble, they welcome the vice president or even the president of the main bank as an advisor for their business activities. So the main bank had been a core of Japanese corporate world. And the government role, and since the main bank have to provide so-called patient capital, well, it's a long-term lending for over 5 or 10 years, and at a very reasonable interest rate. So in effect, the main banks are subject to major financial risks. Once the companies go under, the main bank have to take financial responsibility, incurring a large ink. So in order to protect the main bank from financial trouble, the Minister of Finance, the Bank of Japan, provided the low interest rate environment. So the main bank could earn the profits out of low rate deposit and lending money at a little higher interest rates. So that stabilized Japanese financial system for 40, 50 years after the end of World War II. The system worked beautifully. The corporations, business companies, had not had strong stockholder influence because they had the manager-centric corporate governance system. It's a long history. It evolved from pre-war experience, and I cut that part. I have to speak in an hour to explain that. So they don't have a watchdog, basically, in a business community. The main bank provided watchdog for the Japanese business firms. So those two tiers, the manager-centric corporate governance system and main bank system worked side by side and contributed to the long-term thinking, long-term investment, and very resilient corporate management for years. But time changed after the bubble burst in 1991. The stock market plunged, real estate market plunged. So the companies, especially in the fields of real estate, construction, retail, got into trouble. But main banks were very hesitant to reduce their lending to those financially troubled business firms because if the main bank declared those companies are financially illiquid, the companies will file bankruptcies, and then main banks could never ever lend money. So the main bank helped many business firms in trouble in cooking financial statement. Not legally, it's some gray way, taking advantage of creative accounting procedures, as you can imagine. So all business activities got into inefficiency because of this, the banker-manager collaboration. So the Japanese economies has stagnated because of inefficiency of banking system and corporate managerial problems. Under the Koizumi administration, the Japanese financial community and business community cooperated with the government in overhauling the entire system. The first thing they did is to urge main banks to reduce stakes in business companies. Okay, in two ways. One is to reduce the main bank's holdings of stocks of business companies. So the banks had the major the stock stakes on the business firms. So they reduced their holding of shares. And the second, they stopped sending business advisors to business firms. So essentially that amounts to dismantling main bank system. Okay, that created a vacuum. There will be no watchdog for companies. So the next reform will fill the vacuum and creating the code on corporate governance. So still, Japanese stockholders have very weak influence over the Japanese firms. This code urge, not legally mandate, firms to hire independent external directors as a watchdog to executives. But this has not gone very well, as this Toshiba scandal showed that Toshiba was viewed as a front runner of corporate governance reform, but indeed it cooked books. It made their financial statement appear more profitable than it really was. That happened over this summer. The Toshiba had several independent external directors, including the executives, all friends, ex-diplomats. Those are financially just blind. They are not capable of reading financial statement, or could not be the capable watchdog of Toshiba. So this corporate governance code of conduct has not achieved any tangible result. The reason behind this is that the code has been designed by managers in the cabinet advisory board, in which Toshiba executives represented as Japanese business world. So, well, it's a major problem, and because the LDP has depended upon executives and corporations for their political contributions, electoral support. There's it's intricate connection between LDP members and corporate executives. So, insofar as this connection stay intact, it will be very difficult for the Japanese corporate world to make a major reform on the corporate governance problems. Okay, so as I said yesterday, the Japanese innovation depends upon the major restructuring Japanese corporate system, but this has not gone well because of the reasons I cited. Okay, thank you.
Good. Thanks very much. Sure. Why don't you get the recording so we keep it on tape?
My name.
You're on.
My name is Dana Buntrock, and I'm an architect. So forgive me. I've spent time researching in Japan, Korea, and also Taiwan. And I'm very curious about a question that you haven't addressed. And I want to thank Dr. Chu because I think you began the discussion in a very useful way. Although I find it very interesting that your student, who was such an apt critic, you didn't name. And I want to ask you a question about sustainability. Because basically, the developmental model emerged on the concept of cheap energy, cheap labor, and cheap capital. And you don't have cheap energy anymore. Japan has discovered cheap capital in a variety of ways that you've been trying to deliver it is absolutely useless. And in addition, all of you have dropping birth rates, which means you don't have cheap labor, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to add another shortage, which is common sense. Because basically, what your former student raised was that there's a complacency in the entrenched elites in each of your countries, which says that we want to keep doing things the old way, even though the old way is no longer sustainable. And what Dr. Suzuki talks about is corporate games to try and avoid that. What you talk about in this angst over nuclear power is a similar kind of unwillingness to think about issues. Industries in your three countries are very efficient, but the use of electricity is almost entirely in buildings. 70% of electricity is used in buildings, and your buildings are absurdly inefficient. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yeah. You've got lights on the outside of buildings on Ginza at night. You've got no insulation in most of your buildings. Thermal breaks are illegal in your countries. You know, the crime of wastefulness is going to cause all of your nations great pain, right? And so I'd like to hear a few words about how you get to sustainability. And I think I would like to hear them in relation to how you integrate critical voices. Because I think that that's really important. More than talking about small towns as a place that can do a smaller version of developmentalism, I think you have to talk about the people that are not in power having a voice.
Should I?
Yeah, why don't you take it up? And
okay.
I think there was an implicit suggestion that Jung-Rin might have some things to say about this as well.
This is a very astute comment. And actually, I fully agree with you. So maybe, indeed, there's the eighth shortage. But, you know, Taiwan society now really faces this dilemma. In the sense that, you know, all the major stakeholder or constituency, they have this, you know, I want my cake and have it, eat it too. Okay? So I don't want this and that, but on the other hand, I don't want to recognize that I have to do a lot of self-sacrifice. We have to change our habit, our lifestyle. The price of electricity and water is so low, ridiculously low. The price of gasoline for island, the import, all our, 98%, 70% of our energy. But the politician simply wouldn't dare not, to bring that bad, news or, this message to the general public, okay? Indeed, if we can, as you say, if we, make our building, much more energy saving, our vehicle and all our, consumption habit, we might conserve more than 20% or at least 15% of energy consumption. Then that would be even bigger than one power plant, nuclear power plant. But every time the issue about raising the price of electricity, okay, simply to reflect the scarcity issues imply, how much carbon footprint we have produced along the way, then this populace, the backlash, so member of the parliament, a great majority of them were simply no way, okay. So now we are kind of stuck, No one wants to make that hard decision, hard choices, or to bring everyone to the common sense, as you just mentioned, to realize, cool-headed way, the kind of choices and trade-off that we are facing today. I can only say that at least our political system, but I think that applies to American democracy pretty much, well, maybe not exactly the same way, but nevertheless, it's not up to the test, to help society to identify those, the parameter of choices, and also to, to facilitate this kind of more, far-sighted, and responsible conversation and discourse.
Isn't that implicitly what developmentalism claimed to be?
Yes, so I agree with you. There's a strong element of complacency among the entrenched elite. They want to do the thing, they used to do, right? They take everything for granted, okay? But on the other hand, how to take them out of their kind of catch-22 dilemma, to show them the way, the road, which, theoretically, conceptually, looks very, impressive and progressive, but how to get there, the roadmap. The political system doesn't really offer you a very, easy path to that destination.
Let me raise a slightly different twist on what Dana is talking about, and that is the question of whether it's been democracy and democratization that have made it so difficult that in some ways, you talked about populism, for example, but I think the interesting kind of question that would have been raised under the old model essentially would be, could an authoritarian government have ignored populism, been farsighted, taken up these issues, and basically said, we've got to raise the price of electricity, get used to it?
Well,
so I mean,
I don't want to simplify, say this is versus, democracy versus authoritarian regime. I don't think it's not that simple.
Sure.
What kind of democracy? What kind of, institutional arrangement and what kind of cleavage and what kind of, social capital you have, for the society to utilize democratic procedure, nevertheless to, but still, to use that procedure to get legitimacy, to incorporate, all the voices. At the same time, nevertheless, you can come up with a socially optimal decision, or close to optimal. I think that's the challenge. Yeah.
I saw Joe first, and then John Juan. John Juan.
Thank you. Just a couple reactions. One, a colleague of mine at U of T, Dan Brezhnitz, he's made a a career writing on innovation and innovation systems. And what he's been interested in recently is on what he calls sort of distributive consequences of innovation. And so he's trying to look at how, rather than thinking about innovation as simply being cutting edge new markets and so on, actually looking at the impact of innovation on labor markets and labor market opportunities. And so what he's actually looking at, his research, he's written on Taiwan, Israel, Ireland. That was one of his big books in the start of his career. But he's looking now in Italy. And he's looking at traditional manufacturing industries and looking at how within these clusters, for instance, furniture, and Jong-rin mentioned that, is further furniture, the leather industry, and so on, how you can actually have process innovations, organizational innovations to generate new value. So it's an interesting, I raised that issue simply to say maybe some of the issues that we're talking about in East Asia are not that exceptional, right? This is kind of this is what most mature industrial economies are dealing with. So I think that's the first thing. But in terms of how we remedy this, I thought it was actually quite interesting that Jong-rin and Yun-Han had quite different sort of takes, right? I mean, and maybe this is a function of actually two very distinct political economies. I think we've underappreciated how, and Carl knows this, I mean, his earlier work pinpoints this, how actually vastly different the Korean political economy is from the Taiwanese political economy. And so Jong-rin rightly is talking about democratizing the innovation system, rescaling the national innovation system, and it's motivated by a sort of anti-elitist imperative, right? So it's sort of dismantling the kind of consolidated economies of scale that Korea had built through its chaebol system. Yun-Han, on the other hand, is talking about, and this is a Taiwanese economy that's largely been built on 99% SMEs, about consolidating, right? I mean, consensus building and trying to recapture a sort of consolidated sense of Taiwan's political economy. And I thought it was quite interesting that we have two countries faced with similar challenges, but with vastly different takes in terms of how we actually go about remedying this. And this is not this is just an observation, a reaction, and it's not in any way to stoke the fires of the authoritarian versus democracy debate. I think actually what you're talking about has very little to do with that. It's actually just about institutions, orientation, and how you think about this. But those are two vastly different solutions or proposed solutions for what are quite common problems, both within the dyad we're looking at, but I also want to suggest globally.
Okay, I agree. Both of you raised the crisis of elitist developmental states, and in fact, what Yun-Han said is a system crisis in Taiwan, and that raised the issue of sustainability of new way of developmentalism. That means the former elitist state-led developmentalism right now is facing crisis, and this reminds me one of the paper written by Peter Evans, is a 21st century developmental state. He raises four new tendencies. One is the state right now has to occupy on capability building. That means the common people rather than based on the elites, and also community, and also environmental issue. And so the formal stage of development, in fact, is built on cheap labor, cheap energy, cheap capital. Right now faces a crisis. And what is the alternative? And Taiwan right now facing is, there are a lot of social movement and civil society movement trying to raise alternative. However, there is no consensus. And this is the difficulty. And there is no clear institutional building process. And this is another one. So I think what Yun-Han said, or what Jerome says, is a system transformation, but what is alternative and whether it can be sustainable and provide institutional stability. Yeah.
Great.
I want to react to Jong-rin's comments, and to be honest,
why don't you use the mic just so they can pick it up if you don't mind? Thanks.
I wanted to rain a little bit on Jong-rin's parade. I sympathize with the problem, particularly in Korea, but if you look at the experiences of both Japan and China, you can see that this proposed solution can easily go off the rails. In the Japanese case, every locality in Japan wants to revitalize itself. And there's currently a minister for Jiho Sose, for Difang Sheng. And this combines with the old, very personalistic political system to create a lot of inefficiency and just plain corruption. There was a movement for 20 years called Daisan Sekta, the third sector, which sounded really great. The government will cooperate with business, but really it was deeply corrupt and inefficient. And there are infinite number of failed cases in Japan. And if you look at China, as we all know, local governments have essentially done many of the same things, and they've created investment vehicles, and there's been speculation in land. So I think if you want to encourage local cooperation and local developmentalism too, if that's the right word for it, that may be okay, but we have lots of reasons to think that that can go seriously wrong. So I think, as we're all suggesting, probably the next stage of this project needs to take institutional design a little bit more look at institutional design a little bit more deeply, because the incentives can easily go wrong.
Other comments or other thoughts? Jung-Win, did you want to weigh in on this? Oh. Defend your.
Thank you. First of all, I mean, I feel, again, I'm a small minority. Not many people think like I do. So we are not really, trying to decentralize our political. I mean, although the opposition party tends to be more sympathetic, but solutions are different. I guess opposition party. The traditional opposition party intellectuals or politicians will what they have in mind is what Japan and Taiwan did, giving more resources to local developments and local governments, and we already have our share of that problem in Korea, that local governments not managing their finances very well. We do already have that problem. Well, I told you that like system of innovation is not really exactly not like local infrastructure projects or things like that, and more based on entrepreneurship. That I don't know whether Japan. I think in that sense, I think much more. I looked at two cities in Japan, Kyoto and then Kanazawa, for example, as an example of cities that are produced fairly competitive industries and based on their local competitive advantage. And that's what I'm trying to do in Korea, that Korean cities are all actually historically very different, and they have their own strength and then comparative advantages. But if you go to Korea, one thing you will notice about Korea, much more than in Japan, everywhere you look, it looks the same. That the same apartment, complexes and that kind of lifestyle has destroyed this local traditions and local lifestyle that can be the basis of very interesting local industries, and that's what I have in mind: entrepreneurship and local industries. So, yes, I'm aware of the problem there.
So, like at the forefront of all this social entrepreneurship and social innovation, I mean, in terms of the global imagination, Seoul seems to be. I have no empirical basis upon which to make this claim. I'm just buying into the propaganda as much as the next person. But
we all think it's cool.
Yeah, isn't Seoul like super hip now?
I know. That's Seoul, but the rest of the country, no, it's just follow Seoul. Yeah. They're not really independent culturally. And I just want to make one point about our architecture friends. Is that like we have to be more inclusive. That's what you're trying to say, and we have to have more participation. And my thinking on this problem is that if you look at Korean history, the modern history, we expanded economic participation first, then democratized and expanded political participation. But economic and political participation turned out to be not enough. And I think what we need is more intellectual participation. That's what I mean by intellectually. I mean, in Korea, that I guess I don't know, is that deep inside, elite don't respect anybody who, and then like they don't really want anybody has to say who is not from an elite background. I mean, deep inside they don't know. they will act like they will listen to you, but deep inside, no, they will dismiss you. This kind of intellectual elitism, I think that's so intellectual participation seems like a new challenge for us. And in this sense, I'm a small minority in Korea.
So I'd like to take up this idea for, what's next, and let me be utterly predictable and just speak as an economist and say you don't have to think about the next thing as something that yet again the government does. You could let plurality reign, but that's maybe too unlikely and whatnot we can discuss. But one of the things that I was thinking about that I like to think about in Japan is, so sometimes people ask, what would I suggest if I had to do one thing? What could we do in Japan? So it's a kind of an extreme question. You have to rank order. You can change only one thing. What is the one thing that you would change? Which is an interesting question to ask for the U.S. as well, I guess. And so if I wanted to change one thing in Japan, let me just be a little bit sort of in the sense of being very pointed and hypothetical. I probably would want to change the incentives that bureaucrats face. And currently, if you are let's say a METI bureaucrat, or it doesn't matter, any transportation, building, whatever, at the kacho level, which is section chief, so it's like at age around 35 to 40, that's a big sort of career maker. You either make it or you kind of go horizontal. And the way over the last 40 years, the way to get ahead at that level is if you can create a new law that makes it through the diet. So like the corporate governance change that Suzuki-san was talking about was a little bit like that. But in the old days, of course, you could see write a law for the steel industry and write a law for this and make the developmental state stronger and better. So I sometimes kind of think, what would happen to Japan if we changed this, turned this upside down and said, you get ahead at the section chief level if you abolish a law. And the bigger the law, that you get wiped off the books, the steeper your career. And I think it would do wonders to deregulation. I think in 5 years you could deregulate a lot of things in Japan. And it would change the incentives of the bureaucracy. That's a lot of words to just say. I think if we want to talk about developmentalism and this sort of the issues that you're addressing, right? So wait a minute, we don't have cheap labor, we don't have cheap energy. We have to change the way we live. When we think about, let's talk about insulation and building houses that are actually kind of energy, efficient. So I think something radical has to happen. We can't just say, well, let's go to the small towns and do it. I think there has to be a change in mindset on what the government ought to be doing and what the actual goal is. The goal, why growth? So for Japan, I don't know about Taiwan and Korea, but in Japan, we don't need to grow. Just be rich and happy. And maybe clean environment, nice houses, like larger places to live, spaces, access to waterfront, kind of, fulfilled sort of thing, and put some energy into that rather than thinking about how can this economy grow. But there's just a thought.
2 points. One, a kind of pushback on Ulrika. I'm all in favor of elements of deregulation, and there are certainly dumb laws on the books in virtually every place, but I would remind people that one of the major contributors to the 2008 financial crisis in the United States and the UK was deregulation, and it was a new law. It was a new law. Which one? You're talking about? I mean, it was the elimination of Glass-Steagall.
So get rid of replace.
You got rid of Glass-Steagall, and that was certainly the heart of.
Of course. I'm halfway joking, but I want to get your head around the idea that maybe more laws are not better.
Yeah, I'll try.
Better laws are better.
Better laws are better. Okay, that's the closing cliche. Let me. I mean, in the spirit of what would I change for innovation, and I'm way off the topic of relations between state and corporation. I think one of the most interesting things that Jack Welch did when he was chairman of GE was that he recognized that there was an awful lot of path dependency and technical incompetence on the part of a lot of his senior managers in their 40s and 50s. And basically, they were the folks who were still using faxes. They were the ones that were still going out to the secretary with a note on the yellow pad saying, send an email to the staff saying there'll be a meeting tomorrow, et cetera. And what he did was he required every one of these executives to have a reverse intern, someone under 25 who knew modern technology, and these executives had to spend 2 or 3 hours a week learning from these younger people. I have 4 young people working for me now. I hate to confess that I am learning all sorts of things about the internet and Google Docs that I didn't even know existed. But the central point I would make in regard to all 3 of these places is that in regard to innovation, it's very tough for a 25-year-old to have much of an impact on the country as a whole, let alone an 18-year-old, let alone a college dropout. I mean, these are places that are still locked into the mindset that if you really want to influence things, the chances are probably pretty good that you have to be over 50 or better still over 70. And so how do you get these countries to move in the direction of doing some of the things, and I hate to sound like, you know, another one of these let's do it the American way types, but we do have the success stories of, you know, Twitter or Facebook or Microsoft when Bill Gates was young, et cetera. There are ways in which young people can still provide a, you know, an interesting dynamic. And I think that's very much in the spirit of this innovation, but it's going to be very tough to get the 50-year-olds or the 70-year-olds being prepared to say, there's something I could learn from a 25-year-old. Carl?
But even in that instance, you need a Jack Welch, right, to empower those 25-year-olds. And I think in the context of East Asia, whether it's a 20th century developmental state or a 21st century innovative, capability-enhancing political economy, that you need that strong state in some ways, and it may be it must be in a collaborative way. But Yunhan is getting ready to be at a conference with Francis Fukuyama on Monday over in Stanford, right? And he's told us that you need to get to Denmark, you need a strong state, and you need the rule of law to hold corporations accountable, and you need accountability.
You need both a strong state, a strong society,
yeah,
and then they can work together.
And it's that absence of collaboration that you've identified for Taiwan.
Yeah, so now.
I would like Ulrich's suggestion that we need to come up with radically alternative ways of looking at the problem, redefining the problem. And I'm sure some radical left-leaning intellectuals in Japan have wholeheartedly agree with you. But the problem is they're not part of the established coalition of forces. So unless you get some members, prominent members, in the political structure, in the corporate world in Japan, thinking along the same lines that you are, you're not going to even nibble at the existing system. And I mentioned this, TJ, you know this already because you've spent many years looking at Japanese social movements, how they gradually become placed on the national agenda and then have impact at the national level. It's the way environmental legislation came into being, for example, or social welfare legislation came national legislation as opposed to local movements. I looked at the whole history of the environmental law that came into being in the early 1970s, mid-1970s, looking at the environmental deterioration throughout the country. You've heard a lot about Itai disease, you know, the asthma problems, the mercury poisoning and things of that sort. And when the outcry was growing, mushrooming at the local level, people still looked to Tokyo for legislating administrative structures at all levels of the state down to the local government before they could actually take any action, public action, against corporations, against polluters, and offer assistance to the victims of these environmental problems. It took 15 years for these local voices of individuals, including doctors, intellectuals, and even some corporate leaders, for their voices to be heard by the national government and then to pass legislation that created basically the environmental agency. But it took socialists to mobilize their forces because they're working closely with labor, who are themselves suffering from the environmental deterioration, their working condition, and so on and so forth. But it took 15 years. And I think that culture still exists today. That is, if there is a local issue, even if it's throughout the country, it's still conceived of as a local issue. And for that local issue to be elevated to the national legislation, you need massive, huge national movement. And one of the ways to do that is through the corporate world. If you find some corporate leaders who listen to you, they could be minorities in the beginning, or you could talk to the legal profession. Again, you could talk to just a few minorities in the beginning, but if they listen to you, and it could be through a political party, but typically it's a opposition party, because the entrenched governing party is not going to do anything until it becomes a massive national movement. And so I think this developmental state model still exists entrenched in the mindset of the politicians and of the corporate executives. So somehow you have to re-educate just a few really bright people who are responsive to the voices of the local population. And one institution that hasn't really mobilized its own talent, its own resources, is the university system, the educational system. Because by and large, educators, at least in the past, consider themselves sort of outside of the vested interests. So they were critical of the vested interests, but they didn't put their hands dirty in the dirty politics to change the existing structure. The last time they tried to do it, they failed miserably because they did it through the opposition force, and the opposition actually captured the governing power, but because of the division within the party, I'm talking about the DPJ, and the inability to respond effectively, efficiently, and quickly in a visible way to the crisis that they faced following 3/11, they were out of power very quickly. And as you know, it wasn't the overwhelming support for the LDP that put the LDP back in power, but it was the disgruntlement, disillusionment, the frustration about the inability of the DPJ to organize anything that was of any effect or significance. So again, I think education institutions have to really revolutionize their role in the society. And I think to the extent that we intellectual comrades or colleagues can communicate with the Japanese colleagues, we have Professor Suzuki here, perhaps there may be some ways in which intellectual community in Japan could help dismantle at least those aspects of the developmental state that are just simply not working, or working against the interests of the public.
I do want to stick to the schedule, but Joe, the final word.
Just a very quick point.
You're between us and coffee, tea, and the ability to form small clusters to figure out where the innovation comes from.
Forget it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to intimidate you. Go ahead.
I can't. Now I'm lost for words. I think one of the things with the developmental state is that we view it. There's a tremendous amount of hubris that's invested in the developmental state. The developmental state can do so much, and it has done so much. And one of the things that has always struck me, and I've not been engaged in this literature as much lately, is we don't know much about the failures of the developmental state. We don't know what the developmental state has actually not done well. I mean, Yunhan is probably one of the few people in your article on the auto sector, we were talking about this yesterday, in which you're describing a sector in which the developmental state, with all its hubris, failed miserably, right? But what was really important is what it learned from that. And I think that actually, that kind of modesty, I mean, just as a mindset, that kind of modesty actually, in one sense, blunts a little bit of the hubris, but also, I think, was one of the hallmarks of the developmental state, its adaptability from these failed initiatives. And I wonder if that might be another way of kind of getting into, because that's kind of what I'm hearing in this conversation, is a kind of, debunking the hubris of the developmental state, but replacing with what? That's the question. Well, it's not like the developmental state, in all its hubris, has not been forced to confront these challenges in the past, like a failed auto sector in Taiwan, which was hugely capital intensive, but it moved on. So anyway, it's just a thought.
After saying that you'd be the last one between us and the coffee break, Pei Shan is going to be the last one between us and the coffee break. So, burden's on you.
I think in the context of Taiwan, a new setup paradigm, I wouldn't say it's paradigm already, but actually the elitism in Taiwan, which has been dismantled. I mean, the top-down decision has been made more and more by the bottom-up consensus building. I mean, bureaucracy just gave up. So for the rural area, the agricultural ministry actually has a lot of funding for a budget allocation, but they ask the local community, you set up your own goal, you write your own proposal, and tell me what kind of infrastructure and what kind of item you want. Then it turned out that the force of civil society has been kind of fantasized. So it ends up who in the local area are capable of doing such things. Two kinds of person. One is the local political figures. They got into leadership contests and try to benefit their own clique. And another is volunteer. So basically, there are so many fantasized things, calling for participatory democracy, deliberated democracy, grassroots consensus building. Find out your own community and, apply for funding. So this is a trend already happened in Taiwan. So it's not slogan. It's not something far away. It's happening. But how far that will go? In the end, they always got something like a little small-scale redecoration, remodeling, beautify, the landscape, something like that. It's all a small-scale budget, spent on this, but not the fundamental electricity, infrastructure, the much needed as a long-term development. So that is the real problem that people in Taiwan has been revolutionizing, but without the assistance from the corporate sector. Actually, in the end, they find they need a conglomerate. Who wanted to show interest in those local, capacity building, but the whole society is in the mode of anti-business atmosphere. So that's the quite opposite from Japan's and from Korean's problem. And in terms of the nuclear power problem, everybody is like nuclear power expert. They show such an emotional and so assertive. They think they're right. So that's a problem in Taiwan. It's expert and elite cannot be trusted. but then people think we can make our own decisions, grassroots. So it's really a kind of left wing shift, or that's quite opposite.
Okay.
And I think we're going to take a break.
We are going to take a break. Thank you. Let's call it, we'll say 12 minutes, split the difference. Get back here by 20 of. And feel free to pursue these issues during the break.